والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Sorry for the technical issues. The website is actually blocked here in Iran, and I'm trying to access it, but unfortunately it's not working at this time. Hopefully next week we won't have an issue. The lessons that I wanted to cover in the short time that we have, as you can see, it's called An Overview of Shi'i Hadith Literature. This is the title page that we have. And technically, this course is not going to give you an introduction to Hadith sciences. This is not an introduction to the technicalities of the Hadith sciences. It is just meant to be an overview of the literature that we have and the genre of the different literature that is produced in the Hadith corpus. Obviously, it's a historical discussion. Some of the books that we will be covering, or at least I'll be mentioning, are also contemporary, but most of it is actually a historical discussion. So I'm not going to take too much time. Let's move to the next slide, which is the first slide, which is called the definition. Before we begin any subject, we have to understand what exactly are we dealing with, okay? What exactly are we trying to discuss over here? And for that case, we have to basically define what we are talking about. Over here, because we are saying that we're talking about the Hadith literature, definitely we need to know what do we mean by Hadith, because there is a difference of opinion amongst the Shias and the Sunnis. The Hadith, in its literal sense in Arabic, can mean many things. Okay, it doesn't just have to mean a tradition. It means an event, or incident, or anything to that effect. Basically, something that takes place. That is what the word Hadith in Arabic means literally. Obviously, we're not talking about its literal definition in our discussion. In the Islamic discourse, in the Islamic sciences, when they say Hadith, at the very least, what they mean by it is a prophetic tradition. Okay, a tradition that goes back to the Prophet, where he is either saying something or sometimes even a description by a companion with respects to what the Prophet is doing, okay, even including his silent approval. Okay, that is called a hadith. This is the definition which both the Shias and the Sunnis agree to. Within the Shia literature, the definition is a bit more general. They will say that, look, it's not just the Prophet's hadith, but rather any infallible, meaning including the 12 imams that are after the Prophet, including actually Lady Zahra salamullah alayha, even her statements and words are considered to be a hadith. Why? Because they're infallible and they can be acted upon and they can act as a source of knowledge for us. And we can obviously act upon any tradition which, for example, when it comes to fiqh, they're hujjah, as they say, they're binding upon us. Hence, we will treat them as a hadith. Now, there are other words that are also used in the different books of the hadith sciences. For example, they will say a khabar or an athar or a riwayah. These, in their historical context, actually have different meanings and they have different implications. So, for example, the jurists of Khurasan, when they would say athar or a khabar, they actually meant something very specific. Okay, but now today, because we don't really care too much about the technicalities, we will say everything is a hadith. Okay, so sometimes we have a report from a companion, let's say, but because we don't want to get into too much technicalities, we will call that a hadith as well, even though in reality it may just be a report of a companion. A companion may be giving his own opinion, let's say, on a specific matter. He may say, this is what I think what the Imam said. This is what I think what the Imam said, okay? So this is his opinion, but because it exists in the works of hadith, we will sometimes call it hadith. But obviously, when you get to the technicality of it, we will not consider that a hadith because it's not from an Imam directly. So, definition, very simple, a prophetic or any report that is coming from an infallible. That is what we are dealing with in this session, okay? Moving on to the next slide, we have the branches. See, the hadith sciences or the hadith studies, it is a vast science on its own, okay? And within that, you have at least 4 sub-branches, if you want to call it. The first branch is the history of it. Okay, and what we will be discussing in this and the next session is basically its history. You can call it its history. Okay, and in history, what we discuss is, okay, what happened after the Prophet? What were the books that were compiled? How did the compilation take place? Okay, what was going on? What was the deal with all these fabrications that were happening under the Bani Umayyah, for example, or even later on, Bani Abbas? This is the fabrication in the Sunni world. In the Shia world, what was the fabrication that was happening, for example, amongst the extremist Shias who believed that, for example, the Imams are God? Okay, so we had these groups. How do we deal with those fabrications? What do we do? Or how did the Hadith transfer from one city to another city? Basically, all of these discussions that are historical in nature, and yes, they do play a role in our understanding of the Hadith and so on. That is what we discuss in history. That is one subsection of Hadith sciences. The second subsection is what we call Ilm al-Rijal. And this is a popular subject which has been there since the beginning of Shia Hadith scholarship. And this is the study of the narrators who are transmitting the tradition. Okay, so for example, if a hadith is being transmitted from, let's say 5 people are in a chain, I am narrating from X, X is narrating from Y, and Y is narrating from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, for example. Okay, if you want to know who is this X, who is this Y, okay, what is his theology, what did he believe in, was he even trustworthy, was he a liar, was he an extremist, what was he? Because we want to know if the Imam actually said this, and in order to know that, you need to know if this person is a liar or not. Okay, so Ilm al-Rijal discusses that those kind of qualities of a transmitter, and that's also a very vast subject and so on. Then you have Ilm al-Diraya. Ilm al-Diraya is the study of classifying the hadith. Now that I have figured out that, for example, in this chain of narrators, you have X, Y, and Z, and you know that each of these individuals is trustworthy, what do I call this hadith? We will say in Ilm al-Diraya that any hadith where everybody is trustworthy, we will say this hadith is sahih. Okay, it is authentic. So in Ilm al-Diraya, you learn the technicalities. We're not going to be discussing this. I'm just giving this as an overview. And the last subsection, which is discussed in hadith sciences, is called Fiqh al-Hadith. Fiqh al-Hadith is very important, and this is the study of understanding the hadith now. Okay, now that you have gotten the hadith with you, okay, you have figured out this hadith is authentic, this is what the Imam said. Okay, but what does he mean? What did the Imam actually mean in these words, right? So that is what you do in Fiqh al-Hadith, and it's very expansive, and that is a very difficult discussion as well. Okay, inshallah, moving on to the next slide, what we will be discussing is the history and the books that we have in our Shia Hadith corpus. Some of the authors, obviously we can't discuss all of them. I will just be discussing the major ones, which are very significant. See, when it comes to Hadith sciences or any Hadith discussion, the history of it begins with the history of the compilation of Hadith. Okay, what happened right after the Prophet? Okay, did the companions compile all the Hadith of the Prophet or no? If they did, how did they do it? What did they do? What is up with this story that we hear that, for example, the second Khalifa banned the writing of Hadith? It was prohibited to write Hadith, right? We have these different opinions and discussions. What is up with that? That is a very important discussion historically to get into. So over here, as you can see, I've written that the predominant opinion at that time was that writing down Hadith was banned. Okay, during the time of the Khulafa, most importantly from the time of the second Khalifa. Okay, that is the predominant opinion, even amongst the Sunnis. They accept this. Okay, they say up until 99 Hijri, which is the time Umar bin Abdul Aziz, which was another Khalifa from the Bani Umayyah. He came and he basically lifted this ban up. Okay, he lifted this ban and he told the people who were under him to start writing down hadith. Okay, that is the general opinion. That is how they say the history went. If that is the case, as a Shia, for us, we will say, well, that is, that's really bad. Why would you ban the writing down of hadith? And why would you wait until 100 years after the Prophet for you to write down hadith? And we know that the Orientalists, the Western scholars who study Islam, This is one of the main places where they have attacked, the Muslims, specifically the Sunnis, actually. Because we will figure out in the next few slides that we don't have too much of an issue, even if it was banned. The Sunnis say, look, we have a couple of justifications why the hadiths were banned. Why did the Khalifa say, do not write down hadiths? We have a couple of justifications. The Ahlul Sunnah scholars will mention it. They have about 8 to 12 reasons. I have just mentioned a couple of them here. See, one of their justifications is that, look, after the Prophet had passed away, there was this whole movement of trying to compile the Quran. Okay? Priority had to be given to the Quran. We could not give priority to the hadith at that time. If the Muslims had become busy with writing down the hadith and so on, they would have given it priority. They would have forgotten the Quran. Okay? Or they would have mixed the Quran with the hadith. Okay, which we actually have cases and instances where some of the companions ended up doing that. They ended up mixing the Quran with the hadith. Okay, obviously they would have known themselves. They themselves would have known that this is the Quran, this is the hadith. But what about the later generation that comes? Maybe they could have gotten confused. Okay, so they're gonna say that the second Khalifa had a valid reason to ban the hadith. He says, look, this is not the time. Right now, go and worry about the Quran. Focus on it. Put it together, contemplate over it, and we don't have to worry about the hadith whatsoever. That was, they say, was his justification. Okay. Now, whether we agree with this or not, that's a different discussion. I'm not trying to debate anyone over here. I'm just giving you the reasons what they say. Okay. The second reason that some of their scholars have said, okay, this is some of their scholars. Ibn Qutayba is one of their scholars. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Another one of their famous scholars, they mentioned the second one. They say that many of the companions still did not even know how to write. Okay, and when we say how to write, I don't mean that they didn't know how to write it at all. No, basically the language and the writing style had not developed that much, and we also know this from the compilation of the Quran. Okay, we know this from the compilation of the Quran. Themselves, the companions, they were developing the writing style. For example, there were no dots at that time. The way they would write the alif and the way they would write the waw and these letters, it was still developing. So they're saying that, look, many of the companions did not even know how to write. The writing style had not been standardized at that point, and there was no point getting into the discussion of writing down hadith. And if there was any effort that was being made to standardize the writing, it had to be done and applied on the Quran first. Quran was priority. That is their second justification. Okay. A third justification that some of their scholars have said, okay, this also I have names of these scholars who have mentioned this. They say that, look, the Arabian culture was such that they wanted to promote their memory over writing. Okay, because as we know that the Arabs had a very good memory for memorizing things. Okay, they had memorized the Quran, which is thousands and thousands of verses. So they were saying that, look, when it came to hadith, they did not want to weaken their culture of memorizing. As you know today, for example, a very real example for us, many of us are not very good at memorizing, as opposed to when we look at some of these historical incidents and reports, we see that some of these people were memorizing pages and pages. Not very good at that. Because why? Because we're writing everything down. Everything is on the computer. Everything is on the laptop. Everything is basically in our hands, written down. Everything is written down. So when you write things down, you become dependent on the writing. And you become less dependent on your memory. Okay? And hence, someone can argue that this is actually weak, because knowledge is that which you actually know, not what you have to go and depend on and refer to the books. Knowledge is not in the books. It's with you. So because of this, they would say that the prophetic hadith, the culture of memorization had to be maintained, essentially. And hence the second Khalifa came and he banned the writing of hadith. That's another one of their justifications. Okay. Now, some of them may agree. Some of the Sunni scholars, they themselves have issues with these justifications. Not everybody agrees with this. Okay. Second last justification that they say is that because the Islamic empire was expanding at that time, we were engaged in war. For example, we were up engaging in war in Syria and Iraq, in Iran. These places, there was no time to busy these individuals with the writing down of hadith. And by the way, this is, this idea of war being given priority and certain other duties being sort of sidelined. This was there. Like we're not going to deny this. This was definitely there. One of the reasons they say that Hayya ala khayr al-amal was removed from the adhan was because of war. Because at the time they were saying that, look, war is the best amal right now. You can delay the salat, for example, right? This is the justifications that they say why Hayya ala khayr al-amal from the adhan was removed, because of the context of the war. So the scholars are saying that because of that same reason, they did not want to occupy and get people busy with the writing down of hadith. There were more important things to do, basically. That's what they're saying. The last one is also an important one, and this goes back to the theology. The theology of some of the, or actually a lot of the Sunni scholars. What they say is that, look, Prophet was just a human. Okay, he's just like me and you. Yeah, sure, he was given a wahi, but he's only infallible in terms of conveying the wahi, the Quran. Everything else, he gets angry, he gets upset, he'll get emotional, he'll say something, and you don't have to listen to that. This is based on their theological view of the Prophet. So they say, and they have examples of this in their own books. Okay, so for example, they say at one time, this is I think the second Khalifa. They say that one time the Prophet said something out of anger, and later on the Prophet regretted it. He said, "No, I didn't mean it." So the second Khalifa, according to the Sunnis, they're saying the second Khalifa would say, "See, like you cannot add everything, or you cannot write down everything the Prophet said, because what everything he said was not hujjah. It's not binding. Some of the things he said, he was just angry, or he was emotional. He didn't know what he was talking about. Obviously, we know this because what he did in the last moments of the Prophet's own life, when the Prophet asked for a pen and paper or something to write with, we know what he said to the Prophet. So that same mentality that they're applying here, okay, like he doesn't know what he's talking about. Na'udhu billah. Okay, so these are some of the justifications that the Sunni scholars have given for why the second Khalifa had banned the traditions. Now there's a lot more detail over here. Okay, was it a complete ban? Was it an oral ban? Was it just a ban in the writing? And so on. We don't have to get into that discussion. Moving on to the next slide. Reasoning that the Shia scholars have given for why the hadiths were banned. Once again, there's many reasons. Okay, 20-something reasons have been mentioned. There's a book at the bottom that I'm going to reference as well that you guys can look into. It has all the reasoning over there. One of the main reasons that the Shi'i scholars have said is that, look, one of the main agendas that the Khulafa had was to suppress the fada'il, okay, the merits of the Ahlul Bayt, actually. That was one of their agendas. That was part of their agenda. And because it was part of their agenda, and on top of that, there were so many ahadith about the Ahlul Bayt, especially Amir al-Mu'mineen, that they just could not allow for these traditions to be written down and saved in history. One of the greatest tragedies that has happened actually in the Sunni world and in their hadith corpus, a few of their scholars will agree to this as well, by the way, is how the merits, the traditions that mention the fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen specifically, they've completely disappeared, comparatively speaking. They barely have any, okay, comparatively speaking, I'm saying, okay? They should have had way more. And this was a, agenda that was definitely there. We cannot deny this. It was definitely an agenda, especially later on by the Umayyads. And some of our scholars are going to say that this was the reason that the second Khalifa also had the same reason. That this was their fear, and by putting a ban on writing down ahadith, and according to some, even narrating ahadith orally, this ban was essentially for that reason. Okay. A second reason that some of them have said, the Shi'i scholars, is that if they did a ban on a hadith, it was because it would prevent any sort of potential or opportunity, for anyone to object to what they're doing. Okay, imagine, for example, a Khalifa goes and he does something, okay? And you have a hadith written down by the Prophet saying that, look, the Prophet said, don't do this action. What are they going to do? How are they going to get out of that mess? So some of the scholars have said, by putting a ban on a hadith, nobody could say anything to them, because they were now the source of authority. They were the marja, basically. Okay, and they were closing the door to any objections, any opportunity for them getting embarrassed in public. So hence they put this ban on hadith, because they wanted to gain the authority of the Muslim world. And that's what the third reason is saying as well. Okay, third reason is just an expansion on the second one, because once you close the door to objections, what you're now doing is that you are forcing yourself, okay, upon the Muslim community as the source of religion. We are the source of religious emulation. We are the marja. We are the marja and mujtahid. You refer to us, what we're going to say and what we're going to do. And that we know that definitely happened after they became the khulafa. That obviously was the case. What were the effects? So let's say we accept this view. Let's say there was a ban. What were the effects of this? The effects, obviously, there's tons of effects. We're just mentioning a few here. Is that obviously it caused a lot of further turmoil, disputes, because one side is quoting one hadith, other side is quoting another hadith, and that is from memory. Okay, more ideological views were being sprung out from the fact that there was nothing recorded, nothing was being allowed to be recorded. Anyone was coming and saying anything. Right from the beginning, there was a focus on ijtihad and qiyas. Okay, ijtihad over here, see, ijtihad is allowed, but not for us. We're going to say, why are you doing ijtihad when an infallible is present? Okay, when a source of emulation is present, why are you doing ijtihad? But they created this culture right from the beginning. And even today, when you want to debate with, for example, an Ahl Sunnah, and you say, for example, how can you like both Muawiyah and Amir al-Mu'mineen? They both were fighting with one another. They'll say, oh, they both did their ijtihad. And yes, maybe Muawiyah, he made a mistake, but that's okay. That was his ijtihad, and this was Amir al-Mu'mineen's ijtihad. That's exactly how they justify it, until today. Okay, or they'll say, yes, two companions, they're cursing one another. That's fine. One of them is doing his ijtihad, other one is doing their ijtihad. And maybe they're both mistaken, or maybe one of them is mistaken. But they will get their reward with Allah. So this culture of ijtihad that developed, was very early on. And it was because of this, the fact that there was no nas, there was no textual evidence from the Prophet to rely upon. So they were forced to do their own opinion right now. And qiyas as well. Qiyas is, speculative reasoning on what you think the law might be. Okay. There were vague standards for measuring truth. Okay, if somebody comes and says something, how are you going to measure this with the words of the Prophet? You don't even have the words of the Prophet with you right now. One person can come and say, the same incident happened in Fadak. Okay, that was the exact same incident. The Khalifa came and he narrated a hadith that nobody had ever heard. And what are you going to say to that? What are you going to say to that at that point? It's hard to argue with that. And he himself is acting as a source of emulation at that point, as a Khalifa. Okay, too much legal authority was given to the Khulafa. That was one of the effects of prohibition of hadith. Okay, the variety of reports in the Sunni books is not as extensive as the Shia books. So if you look at the Sunni books, we will also go through some of the Sunni books later in one of the slides, which is very brief. If you look at the quantity of them and the subject matter of them as well, there are not that many riwayat on different subjects. They're very limited. The Shi'i hadith, because we have the later imams, the topics that we have a hadith on are too many. And that's one of the blessings. Sometimes when I was new to Qom and stuff, when I was new to Hawza, sometimes you come across chapters and you're like, wow, there's a hadith even on this topic. The most unexpected topic is a hadith, masalan, from Imam Sadiq, Imam Baqir. So see, the Sunnis in their books, they don't have that. They don't have too many detailed traditions from the Prophet. So then they're forced to do their own ijtihad at that point. This opened the door to fabricating a hadith, because now there's nothing being written. Anyone can come and say anything. Okay, anyone can come and say anything. That's also why the Sunni scholars had to develop ilm al-rijal very early on, because they were forced to. They had no choice. And lastly, if we agree with this view that the hadiths were banned, the Orientalists, the Western scholarship since the 19th century, has heavily attacked, okay, the Sunni hadith corpus on this subject, because they have said to them that if the hadiths were banned, and you're telling us that the writing of hadith started after 100 Hijri, that's a very fragile position to be in. Okay? And by the way, this attack of theirs is restricted to the Sunni hadith corpus. If you read their works, you will see they will not attack the Shi'i like that, because our theological view is that we had imams afterwards. So they will not do this critique on us. They have other critiques, which we get into discussions with them with. But when they attack the hadith corpus, they specifically mean the Sunni hadith corpus. Okay? So this is, these are the different effects. If you want to go into a lot more detail, there's a book by Syed Shahrastani. It's available on alislam.org. It's called The Prohibition of Recording the Hadith, Causes and Effects. Okay, it's a pretty long book, I think, 300 or 400 pages or something, published by Ansariyan. And you can check it out for more detailed discussions. Now, I just want to mention one other opinion, and I think it's important when it comes to scholarship. There is a Sheikh Muhammad Mustafa Al-Azmi. Okay, he's from India, but he's studied abroad as well. And he has a book called Studies in Early Hadith Literature. This is a critique on the Western Orientalists. It's a critique of the Western scholarship on Islamic studies. And he tries to show that, look, the hadiths were not banned the way you're thinking they were banned. And he brings a lot of examples of, small books that many companions in between those 100 years that they had written down, compiled. Okay, small booklets, you can call them. This is a very interesting research. You can look into it. There is one or two Shia scholars who also agree with this opinion. When it comes to scholarship and discussing with Orientalists, this opinion is very important if you know this opinion. Okay, and if you study it and you understand it, they cannot critique you at that point. Okay, I'm mentioning the Orientalists because of the fact that we live in the West, and this is where the discussions are happening. Okay, let's move to the next slide. The role of the Shia in Hadith development. So what I discussed so far primarily concerns the Sunni Hadith corpus. Okay, I'm saying primarily because even our ahadith, most of them are beginning from the time of Imam Baqir. And most of our hadiths are actually from Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq. Now, why don't the previous Imams have riwayat? Why don't they have so many hadiths and so on? Those are, historical, political discussions. Did the Imams even have time, for example, to get into that much, did they have the same opportunities as Imam Baqir and Sadiq, for example? Those discussions, alhamdulillah, as if you go to any mosque regularly over there, you know these things. This is not something, new or strange. Okay, so what about us? What were we doing? Okay, 100 years, let's say hadiths were banned. What were the Shias doing? See, before the time of Imam Baqir, we have a hadith from Imam Sadiq in Usul al-Kafi, one of our major works, that actually says that before the time of Imam Baqir, the Shias were not very well equipped with their knowledge because of the political situation. And it was Imam Baqir who came and he expanded on the different the teachings of the Prophet and teachings of the earlier Imams and teachings of Islam, basically. And he on them and he taught the Shias to the point where even the non-Shia would come to Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq. They would rely upon them. Okay. Now, when this culture began, and it's very interesting as well, by the way, we have riwayat from these Imams. I think specifically Imam Sadiq who keeps telling his companions, write down the hadith, write down the hadith. It's as if perhaps, maybe he knew that, not writing down a hadith, the causes and the implications it had in the past. So we have a hadith where Imam Sadiq, sometimes he gets angry at his companions. Why are you not writing down the traditions? So, he tells them, and that's how the culture developed. So it was Imam Sadiq, he had to develop this culture amongst the Shias to start writing things down that they are hearing and listening from the Imams. So the Shias, from the time of Imam Baqir onward, we had around 400 works which are famous. Maybe we definitely had more than 400, but 400 are the famous ones, up until the time of the minor occultation, al-Ghayb al-Sughra. And each of these works independently is called an asl. Okay, asl. And the plural of this is usul. Now, there's a lot of discussion. What is an asl? What does it mean? Okay, they say, some of the scholars, there's a lot of discussion on this. Asl is a book, or a treatise, you can call it, or a booklet, where a companion or a student of the Imam would directly hear the hadith from an Imam and he will write it down. Okay? That would be called, and any book that was of that nature, it would be called an asl. Either that was called an asl, or sometimes if a person writes down a hadith through one connection to the Imam. So, for example, I narrate a hadith from one person who is now listening to the Imam. So, through one connection, those books were also called an asl. So, when they say 400 asls, they include both of these type of works. Okay. So, 400, you can imagine that's a lot of works. Okay, that were written and compiled down from each of the Imams. These 400 usul is what was used as the basis for later works. So later works that we have today, major works that we're going to inshallah go through, if not this session but next session, these 400 works formed the basis of that. Obviously there were other works as well, but these 400 were the main ones. Now the problem with these 400 works was that they were mixed. For example, one person's book could have had, first hadith, let's say it's about salat. The second hadith, it's about hajj. The third hadith, it's about, some other matter. So they were not in any specific order. They were just books. They were just a compilation of hadith. Whatever the person would hear from the Imam. Sometimes he's in one gathering, Imam is talking about something specific. Next day, he's in somewhere else and Imam is saying something else. So he just writes down in whatever order the Imam is talking. And this is how the works were written. Now, the Shia Hadith heritage, okay, so now that you have these 400 works, what about the actual collective heritage? There's a lot of interesting discussion here. The earlier works were being compiled in Kufa. When Kufa started to fall down, it moved, to a little bit towards Baghdad initially, but mostly towards Qom. Okay, it moved to Qom. So all the scholarship in the Hawza moved to Qom at that time. We're talking about 3rd century Hijri. Okay. Then from Qom, eventually in the 4th century, 5th century, Baghdad was once again becoming popular. So now you also had books coming back again from Qom to Baghdad. And how the amount of hadith they were collecting, and they were gathering a lot of traditions like that. Okay, books were moving. Scholars would travel from one city to another city, sometimes one country to another country in today's meaning. Okay, from Iran to Iraq, let's say, or to Iran to Syria. That's how they would collect these different works, and they would compile the hadiths down. Okay. By the 4th and 5th century, when you had Qom and Baghdad at the same time, the scholars in Qom and Baghdad, these were two major schools. They were two major houses. Just like today you have Qom and Najaf, that time you had Qom and Baghdad. Qom eventually appeared, it didn't last too long, and Baghdad eventually moved to Najaf. That's the history behind it. But in Qom and Baghdad, the scholarship and the approach towards hadith was very distinct. The Qumi scholars, the way they approached hadith was different than the way the scholars of Baghdad would understand hadith. Okay, the Qumis, for example, they had a huge issue with trying to bring in, the intellect. They would try to avoid the use of intellect too much. Okay, they would try to say, look, don't apply too much intellect because you cannot understand everything. In Baghdad, it was completely different. They would use intellect, obviously within its limits, but a lot more than the Qumis. And hence their interpretation of the riwayat, the way they would collect the riwayat, the way they would accept or reject a certain tradition, this would also differ from time to time. For example, in Qom, you have certain scholars who are writing down a hadith that says the Prophet Prophet forgot in his salat. The Prophet was praying Zuhr, he forgot. The 4 rakat he made turn into 2 rakah. And some of the Qumi scholars are saying, no, just accept this. Okay? But in Baghdad, they're saying, no, this goes against isma, this goes against infallibility. We cannot accept this tradition. So they would, cast this tradition aside. So these two schools of thought were there at that time. Okay. Then when Baghdad moved to Najaf, after that we don't have a very significant sort of movement within the Hadith corpus. Okay, whatever books that were written up until 4th and 5th century, that was it. That's what everybody was going by later on. Obviously books were written, but I'm just saying nothing sort of significant or major. Until you get to the 10th century Hijri. Okay, what happened in 10th century? You have the rise of the Akhbaris. Now, Akhbaris, maybe some of you know, maybe some of you do not know, these group of scholars who were, almost popular for around 200, 300 years. These group of scholars were very anti-intellect, okay? And they would say that every hadith that we have, especially in some of our major books, they are authentic. They are reliable. All of them, without any exception. Okay? That's why this group is called the Akhbari. Okay? Akhbar is a plural for khabar. Khabar over here implies the hadith. So anybody who would be sort of obsessed with the hadith, they would call them Akhbari. Okay? That they are only concerned with the hadith. Even in the Quran, it's second level for them. The hadiths are the first level. The hadiths of the Imams, okay? When this movement began, you now once again had more significant contributions to hadiths, okay? So for example, you have, large collections that were written at that time. Bihar al-Anwar was written, Al-Wafi, these big books, inshallah we'll mention them, in a few slides later. These large books were written at that time. And once the Akhbari movement died out, once again, from the time that the Akhbari movement died out until today, we're living in that phase today, we don't have significant works being written. I mean, we don't really need to because the primary works have already been written in the 4th, 5th century. Yes, there were some major, like Bihar al-Anwar was very, very important work by Allama Majlisi, which is the last slide we're going to do in the next session. We'll go into more detail of what was that. It will make more sense. But today, most of the works are not of that nature. Okay. Let's go to the next slide, which is the genre of hadith compilations. So we mentioned that up until 4th and 5th century, the basis of our hadith foundation was set. Okay, you have tons and tons of books, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books that were being written. The genre, okay, if you remember what I was saying the 400 usul works that were written, they were not in any specific order. The hadiths were just thrown in any order. During the time of Imam Rida, alayhi salam, what happened is some of the authors of these books, they began to organize some of their works. They would say, look, let me just take out the riwayat, the hadiths of salat, and put them in one independent book. So then anyone who has to look at the hadith of salat, prayers, they can just look at this one book instead of having to, go through one book and trying to find, where this hadith on salat is. A little bit of this genre culture began to develop around that time. But by the time you get to 4th, 5th century, this was very obvious that you had different types of books being written. So let's go through these one by one and see what type of genre of hadith compilations we had. Okay. Number Number one, you have the comprehensive genre. Okay, what do we mean by comprehensive? These books include everything from the usul. Okay, let's say usul al-din. Okay, tawheed and akhlaq, and the ahkam, the fiqh. Anything that is comprehensive. Okay, and it includes the works of different scholars and different companions of the imams. This is what we're going to call the comprehensive works. Obviously, because they're comprehensive, we don't have too many of these because they're extensive. Okay, even if you have one or two or three that are written in one generation, that's a lot. That's a huge task on its own. Inshallah, we'll discuss when we do Al-Kafi. I'll mention that it took 20 years to write Al-Kafi. Okay, it takes a long time to write these comprehensive works, and these include pretty much every topic and every different narration. Okay. The second type of genre are the thematic works. These works are books that an author would pick a certain theme and they would compile the different ahadith on that topic. Sheikh Saduq, who was a scholar of ours in the 4th century, he was known for this. Okay, many of his works are thematic. So, for example, he has a book called Kitab al-Tawheed. Okay, Kitab al-Tawheed, it's obvious from its name, the book of Tawheed. Okay, it's about Allah, it's about God and His qualities, and especially Tawheed and so on. And he has many ahadith on this subject from the Imams. Okay, that is what we mean when we say thematic works. Okay, Kitab al-Tawheed is one of them. Or, for example, the Kitab or he has another work called Kamaluddin. Kamaluddin is a work on the ghaiba, on the occultation, okay, the minor occultation. That can also be considered a thematic work. So all the riwayat, all the hadith about the ghaiba, he's mentioned in them. The proof of the birth of Imam Mahdi, his ghaiba, what will happen, the qualities, and so on. Everything is in there. Okay. The third genre is what we call the dictations. In Arabic, we call them the amali, al-amali. Okay, what are dictations? Dictations are essentially how you have majalis today. Okay, what they would do back then is a scholar or a teacher would come, sit on the pulpit, or whatever they will sit on, and they would narrate traditions. Okay, so for example, these books are very interesting because they mention the dates. They mention, which date, which day, and which location the teacher gave this lesson. So, for example, in some places, Sheikh Saduq has a work called an Amali as well. It says after the end of, that session, the student is writing, this lesson was given on, let's say, for example, 15 Sha'ban or something, in the Haram of Imam Rida alayhi salam. Okay, so it really takes you back into history. Like, wow, he was narrating this in the Haram, and the students were listening. Or, for example, on the 10th of Muharram, or I think the 9th of Muharram, or something like that, Sheikh Saduq, in that session, he mentioned the ahadith of Karbala, basically. He mentions like 2-3 riwayat on Karbala, on Ashura, regarding Ashura. So, these are called amali. Okay, so Sheikh Mufid is one scholar who has one. Sheikh Tusi is another scholar that has one. Sheikh Saduq, Syed Murtada, many of these scholars have amalis. Now, the interesting thing here is that they are not the ones who are writing the amali. Okay, remember that. They are the ones dictating it. Their students are writing it, and then when their students write it, that's what we have today. Okay, what the students have written down. Number 4 genre is called a musnad. Musnad books were very common in the Sunni world. Okay, Musnad Ibn Abi Shayba and so on. Musnad Ahmad bin Hanbal. Musnad is any work where an author is trying to collect traditions from a specific narrator. Okay, and in the Shia context, it's going to be from a specific imam. So, for example, we have a book called Uyun al-Akhbar. Is a musnad work where Sheikh Saduq is collecting the traditions from Imam Rida alayhi salam. Okay, so all or many traditions about Imam Rida, you're gonna find them in this work. They go back and they end at Imam Rida. Another work that can be considered a musnad work is called Tuhf al-Uqul. These books are actually translated into English. Inshallah, next session, the last slide is going to be all the books that are available in English. Both of these are available in English. Okay? Tuhf al-Uqul is sort of like a musnad because in each section, he tries to report a number of hadiths from every imam. Okay? And he ends it with that imam. So this is what we mean by musnad. Number 5 genre is, I couldn't think of a better name, but I came up with the name creative. Okay, creative, what do I mean? These are, an author may have a unique idea or like a unique methodology in compiling traditions. Okay, let me give you an example. Sheikh Saduq has a work called Al-Khisal, okay, the characteristics and so on. This is also translated into English. The qualities, okay, the characteristics. Okay, what does he do? He says in any hadith where the number 1 is mentioned, okay, the number 1, that's going to be chapter 1, okay. So he'll bring all the hadiths that have the number 1 mentioned in them. So for example, the Prophet might say, one type of individual will go to heaven. Okay, a person who has this one quality, he will be going to heaven, for example. Okay, so he'll bring the number 1. Then he'll go to 2. Any hadith that mentions 2, okay? Then he'll go to 3 and 4 and 5. So let's say, that he goes to section 5, and he may bring the hadith, even though he doesn't bring it, but, if he were to write it today, maybe he would bring this hadith that the signs of a mu'min are 5, okay? So he will bring that in that category. So this is like a unique methodology. It's a creative style of writing a book. Okay, we have others as well. We have musalsalat and so on. Don't have to get into those. Number 6 we have is tafsir works. Now tafsir works are, in the past, were essentially compilations of hadith. Okay, if you are used to looking at tafsir al-mizan of Alama Tabatabai, this is not how the classical tafsir works were written. Okay, most contemporary hadith tafsir works are not written like the way classical hadith tafsir works were written. Classical and older tafsir works were just hadith collections. Okay, whatever verse that a author is approaching, whatever hadith is on that ayah, on that verse, they will collect it. Okay, so that is what we have for tafsir. Number 7 is theological works. Now the Shi'as have tons of theological works where they would compile a hadith. And it was important for us because there was a lot of attack on the Shias, obviously, on imama, on the topic of imama, and on the topic of ghaiba and Imam Mahdi and so on. So what our scholars did is that they started compiling books on specific theological works. Okay, so for example, we have one book called Al-Imama wa Tafsira of Sheikh Saduq's father. This book is all about the riwayat and hadith about imama and the 12 imams. And we have others as well. And so on. We have other books as well. Let's go to the next slide. Number 8. Number 8 is genre of merit. Fadail. Fadail are the merits that are about obviously about other Ahlul Bayt as well, but specifically because they were written for polemical purposes. They were written for debating purposes, okay? That's why they would mostly focus on the Fadail of Amir al-Mu'mineen, but as I said, they could be about other Ahlul Bayt as well, okay? They could be Manaqib and so on. Number 9 we have is history. Now, obviously, when it comes to Shi'i history works from that time, you have works that focus mostly on the lives of the Imams. Okay, so for example, we have Kitab al-Irshad of Sheikh Mufid. Now, if you look at Kitab al-Irshad, a lot of it is just hadith. A lot of it is just hadith, especially when it comes to the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, or you have the work called Al-Jamal of Sheikh Mufid, which is about the Battle of Jamal. Or you have the work called Al-Gharat of Thaqafi, which is also, that is the hadith discussion on Muawiyah's interference with Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay? These are all hadith works. Okay, they would write these hadith in them. Sorry. Number 10 10 you have is ziyarat and dua. Ziyarat and dua works, as is obvious from its name, were works that were compilations of supplications and ziyarat, visitations. The most famous ones, for example, are Kamil al-Ziyara. Okay, Sheikh Mufid has one. Sheikh Tusi has one. Many of these scholars have written books on this topic. Number 11 is Fiqh al-Hadith. Fiqh al-Hadith are those traditions in which the Imams themselves are explaining a certain tradition or a certain concept that has been mentioned in a Hadith. Okay, this is very interesting. Now, the best example we have of this is called Ma'ani al-Akhbar of Sheikh Saduq. But we have other examples as well. Okay, we have one book called Al-Majalat al-Nabawiyya and Al-Istifsar and so on. We have other books as well. But the most famous one, I would say, is Ma'ani al-Akhbar of Sheikh Saduq. The title means meanings of the ahadith, meanings of the report. What does the hadith mean over here? What does this hadith mean? So obviously we're not the only ones that have this question. Sometimes the companions themselves would have this question. So they would go and ask the Imam for clarification, and that hadith is now being used in this work. Okay. Number 12 are the Rijal work. Okay. The Rijal works were, many of the Rijal works were also compilations of hadith. What have the Imams said about, different individuals and so on. And lastly, we have is ethics, akhlaq, compilations of the akhlaqi traditions. Okay, Sifat al-Shi'a is one book of Sheikh Saduq. Qualities of the Shia. How is the Shia meant to be? What are the qualities that a Shia is supposed to have? Akhlaqi traditions, right? We have many of these as well. Okay. What we had for the genre. So I'm going to try to finish the next 3 slides, and I think we should end it for today. The next slide is talking about, so I have a table made over here. The table is about major books of hadith. Okay, major books of basically Shi'i hadith. Now I want you guys to pay attention to the approximate number of hadiths as well, okay? Because that's very important, especially when I compare them with the Sunni hadith on the 2 slides afterwards. If you look at the first book, it's called Al-Mahasin, okay? And these are books that we still have today, okay? These are not books that are like law or anything like that. No, these are books we have today. Al-Mahasin is written by a scholar named Ahmad al-Barqi. As you can see, he died in 276 Hijri. So, basically like even before the Ghaiba. Okay. He wrote a book called Mahasin, and this book has around 2,600 traditions. Now this hadith mostly focuses on ethics and law. Okay, it's mostly ethical traditions, legal traditions. Okay, that is one of the earliest books we have. Now the second book that we have is Usul al-Kafi. Okay, this is a very important book. Okay, Sheikh, okay, sorry. I think I'm actually online on the on any meeting. So if you want, I can continue speaking on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I shut off the WhatsApp call?
Sure.
Okay, let me shut it off.
Can you guys hear me? Okay, excellent. So, second book that we want to discuss is Al-Kafi. Al-Kafi is our most important work. Okay, it is as I said, it is the most important work that we have. Written by
Hello.
Sheikh, let me just continue with the call. I think my internet is just gonna keep acting. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Let me just Al-Kafi, so Shaykh Kulaini, he compiled 16,000 traditions in this. Now, if you look at the explanation that I've written, it includes, theology, ethics, law, even history. Okay, history of the Imams, when were they born? How each of the Imam was born. What is the history behind them? Everything is in this Al-Kafi. Okay, and inshallah, in the next session we're going to expand on this a bit more. Who was Shaykh Kulaini? Why was he important? How did he compile this? What did he base it on? We're going to go into that in a lot more detail. Okay, but this is also one of our major. So we have 4 major works. So the Sunnis, we say they have 6 major works. We have 4 major works. This is the first of the 4 major works. That's why it's in bold. Okay, the second major work is called Man la yahduruhu al-faqih. I've just written al-faqih for short. Okay, Man la yahduruhu al-faqih is the full name. This was written by Sheikh As-Saduq. This has about 6,000 traditions. Okay, and this is strictly to do with law, ahkam, fiqh. Okay, how do we pray? How do we do wudu? How do we, hajj and so on? Anything to do with fiqh, this is what this book is about. Okay, and inshallah we're going to expand on this one as well in detail. Okay, why is this one important? The third book and the fourth book, okay, we are by Sheikh Tusi. The third book is called the Tahzib al-Ahkam, which has about 13,000 traditions, 13,500 traditions. And from its name, it's obvious, it's an ahkam book, it's a law book. All the riwayat on law, on ahkam and fiqh. And the fourth one is called Al-Istiqrar, also by Sheikh Tusi, 5,500 traditions. This is also on law. Obviously, you may be asking, why did he write 2 books on ahkam? Like, what was the point of that? Inshallah, we're going to actually go through all 4 of these books in detail in the next session. Okay, because these are our 4 major books. Okay, if anyone wants to have any understanding of Shi'i sort of Hadith, these 4 books they need to know. I mean, just like the Sunnis know there are 6 major books. Sometimes we even know their books. We don't know our own books. These are the 4 books that you need to know. Okay, these are, inshallah, we'll expand on them in the next session. Then you see this huge jump from 460 Hijri to 1091 Hijri. Now, if you remember in the history discussion, I mentioned, after the 4th and 5th century, we didn't have too many major works. And the major works began again during the time of the Akhbaris. Now, it's interesting, the next few scholars I'm going to mention are actually Akhbaris. Okay? And the next work here is Al-Wafi, called Al-Wafi, by Syed Khashani. Syed Khashani was a student of Mullah Sadra. Okay? Mullah Sadra, now, even though he was a philosopher and, he had a lot of esoteric Irfani views as well. But when it came to hadith and stuff and the way he would treat them, he was basically Akhbari. See, Akhbaris had different degrees as well. Not every Akhbari was extreme like some of the other Akhbaris. So Syed Khashani writes this book. He has about 50,000 traditions. What he does in this, he collects all the hadiths from the four major works. Okay, plus some extra. It's not just the 4 major works. So the 4 ones we mentioned above, he puts them all together in one collection. Okay, he puts them all in one collection. By the way, you guys may be wondering, why would these scholars do this? Like, if the 4 books are already there, who in their right mind would want to collect all of them again in one extra book? Like, what's so special about this? See, we ask this question today because we have a book that is printed, it's published, and then that's it. Anyone can go and access that book. But this is not how it was back in those days. Okay, we're still talking about a time where you have manuscripts. For a book, you may have 14 different manuscripts, 20 different manuscripts. In some of those manuscripts, there are errors in them. There are mistakes made by the scribes, okay, people who would be paid to copy down the books. They may have mistakes in them and so on. So a scholar may see all of this after centuries. We're talking about centuries later now. And they may say, look, I need to do something to put all of these books together in one work and fix all the errors that have sprung out in these manuscripts. Okay? And sometimes, obviously, they would add their own explanation to these riwayat as well. That's why you have this happening. Okay, otherwise, yes, today, imagine like somebody does that today. They'll be like, why are you doing this? The books are already available. But we're still talking about very difficult times. The last book on this slide of this table is Wasail al-Shi'a. Wasail al-Shi'a is also by Sheikh Hur al-Amili, a Lebanese scholar who lived in Iran. He's buried in Mashhad in the Haram of Imam Rada. He's also an Akhbari scholar. Okay, so you can see he lived in 1104 Hijri. He brings about 35,000 riwayat from the 4 books plus 70 other books that he had at his disposal. Okay, 70 other manuscripts that he had. So that's what he did. Let's go to the next slide, which is going to be the second last slide for today. Bihar al-Anwar. Okay, maybe many of you have heard of this collection, Bihar al-Anwar, which is about 110 volumes today. Allama Majlisi. Okay, Allama Majlisi, so if you look at his death date, 1110, meaning he's a contemporary to Sheikh Hur al-Amili, which was a previous scholar. He's a contemporary, okay? In this work, there's around 85,000 riwayat, 85,000. One of the works we're going to expand on is also Bihar al-Anwar. I'm going to expand on this a little bit in the next session. He basically collected everything, okay? Not just the 4 books, but there were a lot of books that were being lost, and he was worried about them and so on. He essentially put everything in a major encyclopedia, obviously with the help of students. He wasn't doing it alone. So that's what he did in Bihar al-Anwar. Then you have Mustadrak al-Wasail by Muhaddis Nuri. Muhaddis Nuri is the teacher of Sheikh Abbas Qumi. Sheikh Abbas Qumi is the author of Mafatih al-Jinan, which is everybody knows about that book. This is his teacher. Muhaddis Nuri is his teacher. Okay, he's buried in Najd. Mustadrak al-Wasail, so if you look at it, it has 23,000 ahadith. This, he adds a couple extra traditions, which he believed Sheikh Hur al-Amili, he forgot, he missed out on these. So he adds a bit more. Okay, he also removes quite a few, and then he adds, for example, the theological, the ethical, and historical traditions in them as well. Mustadrak al-Wasail. Then you have Jami al-Ahadith. Jami al-Ahadith is by Ayatollah Burjardi. Ayatollah Burjardi passed away in, I think, 1960, early 1960, if I remember correctly. Obviously, Ayatollah Burjardi was one of the major, was the grand marja of his time. He's the sole marja of his time. In his work, there are 48,000 ahadith. Okay. There's a whole history behind why he wrote this, why he did this. Okay, I don't think I have to expand on that, but there's a whole reason why he did this. But most of this work is a book of law. Okay, it's all it's all ahadith that concern fiqh and ahkam. And the last contemporary work, which I'm going to mention, is called Mizan al-Hikmah. Okay, Scale of Wisdom is being translated into English, I believe, by ICAS, maybe published it. By Ayatollah Rishahri. Ayatollah Rishahri is here in Iran, in Tehran. He has an institute called Dar al-Hadith, and they wrote this book, and this is actually a book written for the general public. Okay, there's a lot of interesting ahadith and so on. If you can get a copy, I think Bathurst, JCC, they definitely must have a copy. There are about 23,000 ahadith in this, and they've been translated into English as well, this book. It's a collection of ayat. Okay, mostly theological, ethical, a lot of ethical traditions are in it. Okay, so these are some of the major works that we have at our disposal today. Let's go to the last slide. Okay, last slide for today. And this is just for you to compare and contrast. If you remember, in Al-Kafi alone, we said that there were 16,000 traditions. Okay, now let's look at the Sunni books. They have 6 major works. The first one, the most famous one, is Sahih Bukhari. Sahih al-Bukhari, obviously we know that. 7,000 traditions. Okay? This includes, by the way, repetitions, and some of the hadiths are repetitive. It's the same hadith, repeated 2-3 times. So 7,000. Sahih Muslim, 9,000. Sunan Abi Dawood, 4,800. Okay, Sunan al-Tirmizi, almost 4,000. Sunan al-Sughra of An-Nasai, 5,000. That's the first 5. And, there's 6 major books. There's a difference of opinion. Is it Sunan of Ibn Majah or Al-Muwatta of Ibn Malik? But in either case, you have 4,000 and you have 1,700. In terms of numbers, there's actually no match. Okay? And this is what I was talking about earlier. That look, because the hadiths were banned, or there was not a very strong culture in the earlier period, there's not that much that they were able to record from the Prophet. Because look, you're telling me that the Prophet was, a prophet for 20-something years. How much was he talking, during the course of his life? A lot. Just if you transcribe my speech today, the talk that I'm giving for an hour and a half, you can make hundreds and hundreds of ahadith, just ahadith in the meaning of what I'm saying, hundreds of ahadith from just one lecture that I'm giving. Okay? So now imagine, from the Prophet, 23 years of his prophethood, you're only able to come up with, 9,000 at best in Sahih Muslim. Okay? And that includes repetitions. Hence, the Shia corpus, we not only have the hadiths of the Imams, we obviously have the hadiths of the Prophet within them. Obviously, the Imams are usually quoting the Prophet in our case. Okay? So just one of our works has 16,000. Then you have other works which are, 13,000 and 50,000 and so on. As I said, it has 85,000. And those are hundreds, he uses hundreds of works, 100 different works in his, encyclopedia. So I just wanted to show you this comparison in terms of, why the Sunnis are forced to do qiyas in their law, because they don't have any riwayat to go back to. Okay, some of the topics they have nothing on them. And one of their other major works is also Musnad of Ahmad bin Hanbal and so on. But their 6 major works are these that I've mentioned over here. So inshallah, this is what I had for today. I don't want to start the next slide because that will go into too much detail, and I want that to be a fresh lesson. So if there are any questions at this point, I'll try to log in, see if I can log in once again, and maybe I can read the questions myself and address them. But if Sheikh can read them for me, I can maybe answer them if there are any.
If you would like to put the question, you can just put in the chat column. Just add your questions under the chat box, and I'll read it to Syed.
How do I open the chat? Attendee chat. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, if there's no questions, then inshallah next session we can continue with the Al-Kafi. Okay, brother has a question. Okay. It began compiled by John Newton. Was it under his? No. This was not under his instruction. Not as far as I know. This was. Sometimes the cultures were developing independent on their own. Okay, it could have been because of the Sunnis, for example, could have been developing this sort of genre, and Shias being in that culture, in that environment, they would have just taken that idea from them and they would have done it. These are not things that are sort of dictated by an imam, necessarily speaking. These are cultural developments that happen in any society, community. That's how it developed, as far as I know. I don't think Imam Rida gave a like a command saying start separating the hadiths one by one. No. Brother Rajani has a question, but I think he hasn't typed it yet.
Yeah, even I can't see it. Muhammad Mehdi, can you go ahead and ask a question? Can you type your here it is.
Okay. Said there are some solutions which have been entered our book, so I didn't have to be rechecked. I mean, yeah, of course, like it depends what he means by Sunni traditions. I know Sayyid Ammar's opinion on this. His opinion is based on Sayyid Hussein Mudarrisi, who is a scholar in city who I respect a lot. He's a very strong academic. There are definitely certain Sunni. It's not just Sunni traditions. You have even Ghuluf traditions in the books that we have today, and that's why we, all of our scholars except the Akhbaris, all of them have said that, look, when it comes to our hadith, you have to check every hadith one by one independently. You have to check its reliability. You have to check if it's authentic or not. You have to check its historicity. Where is it coming from? Unlike the Sunni hadith corpus, where they will say, no, Sahih Bukhari is altogether authentic. No, so our scholars understand this. Like we know that we have certain traditions that have come in from people who were not reliable. Like we understand. Even the scholars themselves who were compiling, they understood that there could be a chance. So, for example, Sheikh Kulaini, when he compiles his Usul al-Kafi, look at his introduction. In his introduction, he says, look, I have compiled what I believe to be the most correct traditions. However, if there is something in there that you may realize that it's mistaken, check it with the Quran. That's the first thing he says. Check it with the Quran. Okay? Or check it with the intellect and so on. Our scholars know this. So, although I would say the Sunni traditions are not as, have not infiltrated as much as some other traditions, like the Ghuluf ones, which our scholars have also pointed out. I think to say that, that there was a mass infiltration of Sunni tradition, I think that would be a huge exaggeration. I don't personally believe that. I hope that at least answers the question.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Yeah. Thank you. I just pray for us, inshallah. And hopefully in the next session, when I expand on the Al-Kafi and so on, we can at least appreciate the effort that these scholars put in. Because sometimes really when you look at the way these scholars were doing it, it blows your mind away. How they were traveling from one city to another city just to collect, 5-6 ahadith. And without them, we wouldn't have had, anything today. So, inshallah, next session when we expand on it, even Bihar al-Anwar, the reason why I mentioned that, even though there's a lot of issues with Bihar al-Anwar, scholars have mentioned that, look, not everything is reliable. But at the end of the day, you have to appreciate the effort of Allama Majlisi. What he did in that book is unmatched. No one has a work like that. And you cannot find any effort put by any scholar and his group of students that they have done in the case of Bihar al-Anwar. Okay. But inshallah, that will be for next session. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh from my behalf. If there's anything else, Sheikh, you can say.
Thank you very much. Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam.